For our fourth and final panel discussion, we'll explore global and China perspectives on learning through play. This is a pre-recorded session. Our moderator for this session is Dr. Jiali Meng. She's a research advisor at the Chan Yidan Foundation. Prior to that, Dr. Meng served as the Dean of JD FinTech Research Institute, the Chief Economist and Vice Dean of Tencent Research Institute, and Deputy Secretary of Tencent Foundation. Dr. Meng will introduce the panelists herself. I turn things over.
Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to the last session. I'm Meng Jiali. I'm research advisor for Chen Yidan Foundation, and also I'm the moderator for this session. The theme for this session is learning through play, global and China. Why we want to start this project is actually in 2019. Sir Fazal Abedin won Yidan Prize for his work in learning through play model. At that time, we realized that for the general audience in China, the learning through play concept is not so popular compared with other countries. Because we Chinese people believe that, as the ancient Chinese proverb say, 吃得苦中苦，方为人上人. It's like in English, it's like no pain, no gain. Study should be hard, should be difficult, should be painful in nature. But how wonderful it would be if our children could learn things through play. So that's why we cooperate with LEGO Foundation on this project. We find the established researcher in this field, and we want them to help us to get the general perception of China's learning through play. And we want them to help us to find the challenges in implementing learning through play. Now, let me introduce our honored guest. The first is Dr. Bo Stern-Thompson. He is chair of learning through play in LEGO Foundation. Second is Professor Kathy Hirsch-Pasek. She is Stanley and Deborah Lefkowitz Professor of Psychology at Temple University and Senior Fellow, Brookings Institute. The third is Professor Shang Junjie. He is Executive Director of the Lab of Learning Science in Beijing University. And the last is Professor Yang Rui. He is Associate Dean of Faculty of Education in Hong Kong University. Now, let's start. What is LEGO's belief of learning through play and why it is so successful?
Thank you very much. And also just want to say thank you for organizing this fantastic conference here with the Yidan Prize. And thank you for the researchers to be part of the conversation. I'm very excited because you will hear some of the new insights that is beginning to evolve from our collaboration. And I think there's a quite clear reason why we speak to governments around the world, and many partners are interested in learning through play. And the first reason is, I think across the LEGO entities, we have a particular aim. And our aim is to inspire and develop the children who are going to become the builders of tomorrow, literally the ones who are going to rebuild the world. So having that in mind, that children are the ones we need to do the best for, children, young people, to grow up, to shape the future, to shape the world, is quite important. The second one is, given the world we're living in right now, with more change, more uncertainty, there's actually a need not only for knowledge, but a different set of skills, a way to apply this knowledge. So in our work, the aspiration is to think about how do we support children to be creative, to be engaged, and to keep learning, to be lifelong learners. And that means they need to solve problems, they need to keep being motivated and equipped to learn new things because jobs change. And that's where it requires to be open-minded, to be curious, and have a playful approach to how one learns, to keep learning new things. And lastly, what seems to be coming up in our approaches is that it's not only a belief any longer. It's not only an approach, it's actually something that's being investigated across the international research community. So we now see that there's a science that is emerging that illustrates that these abilities that are critically important for children happens when children are physically active. and when they are engaged in quality, hands-on, meaningful experiences. And what we need is an international community that actually help us rethink our education systems to be much more holistic. And where we now can see that parents and schools and communities are beginning to apply these ideas. So there's no kind of differences between how we learn and the opportunity to be actively engaged and enjoy the learning environment. Actually, it's so critical in the times we live in right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Bo. My second question to you is that why LEGO Foundation is interested in looking at learning through play in China with Yidan Foundation?
That's a very good question. And I'll start with the obvious one, that the LEGO Foundation and the Chen Yidan Foundation shares the same aspiration for the future. We share the same aspiration and the need to reimagine learning and use that to reimagine learning based on the science of how children learn, children's development, their creativity and play, to build this broader skill set. The second one is that we also recognize that we need to collaborate and learn much more from each other. So the biggest players and across all sectors needs to come together to form stronger connections between the research and the practices and work together globally to be able to pull together the research communities and learn from each other in different parts of the world, because that's what we need as a community, a new kind of education. And finally, what we also see as a shared interest here is that we can see a much stronger intersection between the school, the home, and the community. So the research interest around forming an ecosystem around the child, where we need to invest much more in understanding the role of the physical environment and how new technologies are changing these environments in new ways.
Thank you very much. It's very honored to work with your foundation together. Okay, so our next guest is Professor Cassie. So Cassie, I know that you are an established researcher in this field, and you have done many research about learning through play in different countries, including Eastern and Western countries. Just for general audience, it's difficult for them to distinguish playing and learning through play. Just for them, play is quite easy to identify, but what is learning through play? So what is the definition of learning through play, and what should we know about learning through play?
Well, thank you so much for asking this great question. And I just want to tell you how very excited I am to be here today. And I also want to congratulate the winners of the Yidan Prize this year, because it is quite an honor. It seemed to us when we started on our research adventure, and it's very much a global adventure, that to succeed in the modern economy, what Bo was talking about, it changing the education system, is an absolute essential. There's now a great divide between what the business leaders are telling us and what we're seeing on the ground in education systems. So to succeed, we need to teach in the way that human brains learn. And we need to master a suite of skills that includes content, but is so much more than content. And so we came upon playful learning, this international movement that promises to change education, not just in the classroom, but also out of school as well. And it is built on the science of how children learn and what they need to learn. So what do we mean by that? For how children learn, if we went across all the scientific papers that have been written to date, we would find there's certain characteristics. And those characteristics coalesce in play. You should be active, not a passive learner, engaged, not distracted, meaningful, not disconnected. It's better when we learn in social environments. We can learn solo, but we learn so much more with other people when it's iterative and when it's joyful. And we also have a sense of what the children need to learn today to succeed in the business world of tomorrow. Yes, content is important, but also we know we need collaboration, working in teams, communication, critical thinking, that creativity that Bo was talking about, and confidence. If we put the how and the what together, how you learn and what you need to learn with a clear learning goal, you have playful learning. Now, it turns out the playful learning in the classroom is catching on around the world. In Canada, for example, they wrote, the purpose of our program is to establish a strong foundation for learning and to do so in a safe and caring, play-based environment. That's from the Ministry of Education. And you can see this happening all over the world. We're also seeing changes in the way people think about playful learning outside of the classroom. In this global phenomenon, people are talking about child-friendly cities and towns. And we're literally transforming transportation hubs like bus stops and train stations into playful learning architecture where people can grow their minds and grow their enjoyment together while they're waiting for the bus. Life-size board games. The evidence supporting this data is enormous, thousands and thousands of papers. But to get here, we're going to need attitude change, we're going to need educational policy, and we're going to need city policy. And when we looked at parents in China and in the United States and asked, do you see overlap? When you hear about going to the zoo, tumbling on a bed, watching educational television, is it play or is it learning? Is there overlap? And what about the things that are needed to support playful learning? Parent support, access, location, materials, and joy. Are they separate or do they overlap? What we found is that on the activities, in China, there was a 78% overlap in what activities parents thought was play and learning. They were starting to converge. In the United States, 95%. When we asked what you need to support it, parents didn't feel that play and learning was as closely aligned in China, but in the United States, they did. So when I look across the global map, I actually think that policy in China is beginning to lead the way toward playful learning. I think it's very exciting that there's a national 5-year plan that aims to create child-friendly cities. And in those cities, we can create them as playful learning cities where children are engaging with caregivers to be learning and to be stimulated as they wait at those bus stops. There's a policy of reducing homework and extracurricular classes, leaving time for playful learning. And time limits on online gaming for children are another step forward. So both in and out of school, if we look across the science and we look across the community, we see that playful learning holds the promise of reimagining education so all kids will thrive in the economy of the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, my next question is our Yidan Prize laureate, Sir Fazil Abedin, founder of BRAC. He devotes his life's works to the learning through play model. So if we want to implement learning through play in school and beyond, then what are the challenges?
So I think the challenges are really in helping to change parental attitudes and behaviors. When parents and business leaders and community leaders and ministries of education begin to understand that through learning through play and playful learning, children will not only have the content outcomes that we desire, but so much more. I think they will embrace it right away. And the policies that the Chinese are putting into place are going to go a long way to helping China get there early.
Okay. Thank you very much. So our next guest is Professor Xiang Junjie. So my first question to you is that I know your team has done extensive research into the perception of learning through play in China. You have more than 2,000 samples, covers 6 provinces in the first-tier and second-tier cities. So maybe could you please share what is your key findings?
The first question. Okay, We did a survey regarding LTP in China and collected data through questionnaire, interview, and observation. 4 to 5 grade students in primary schools are our main samples, along with their teachers and parents. We gathered the data from 7 big cities of central and eastern China, such as Beijing and Shenzhen. Next, I will introduce our key findings on the perception and attitude, space, technology, and challenges. The first is the perception and attitude. The results show that most students, teachers, and parents from middle-class families recognize the idea of LTP. Students recognize the concept of LTP greatly more than educational games. Comparing to the positive attitude to the idea of LTP, about half teachers and parents keep neutral attitude to its effects on learning. In addition, some parents still keep doubts about LTP. Firstly, 46% of parents think that the efficiency of LTP is still not high enough. A similar percentage of parents regarded LTP as plain digital device to learn, so they think LTP may hurt their children's eyesight or lead to game addiction. 40% of parents think they have low capacity of guiding children to play and learn well, and they also lack time and appropriate tools. The second is the space. We found that there are 4 types of LTP space. They are home, communities, schools, and venues, refer to the museums, parks, stadiums, and business palaces. Totally speaking, current LTP space of China shows some core characteristics: flexible and open, rich resource and technology, social interaction, and activities-supported learning. Home and city cultural space are most commonly used LTP space. Regarding children's favorite LTP place, the proportions of outdoor subject parks and LTP projects in malls are the biggest, followed by science and technology museums and school space. Boys like science and technology museums more than girls, while girls like home and school space more than boys. The third is the technology. Now, technology-supported LTP become more and more popular in China. According to our survey, almost all parents or families bought at least one digital device for their children, and the original aim is to help them learn online. PIs are the most commonly used tools to support digital LTP, followed by smartphones. Emerging information technologies are gradually welcomed by children. Boys like learning robots and game machines more than girls in LTP.
Okay, thank you. My second question is that, in your opinion, what are the key challenges of implementing learning through play in China?
The second question. For the challenges, the first is to solve parents' worry about eyesight damage and game addiction. Secondly, teachers' instruction design abilities of LTP in classroom need to be improved. And they also need more support from schools and educational administrative departments. Thirdly, we also found that many students encountered interpersonal relationship issues among LTP. 30.7% of students reported the issues of verbal attack, and 28.67% of students encountered interpersonal alienation in LTP. Even more, 19.34% of students experiences aggressive behaviors in LTP. The next challenge is the health development of LTP industry, which needs more supervision, collaboration, and guidance. For example, how to evaluate the quality of educational games and classify them. Finally, I want to say, well-designed LTP has great potential to make children's learning more interesting, more engaging, and more effective. Of course, this needs the joint efforts from families, schools, and society.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next guest is Professor Yang Rui. My first question is that, how has learning through play developed in Hong Kong? How long has it taken for learning through play to gain traction in Hong Kong?
Okay, thank you, Zhao. First and foremost, thank you for having me here on this very important theme. Please also allow me to express my gratitude and appreciation to Yidan Foundation and to Professors Kathy and Junjie. I did read your slides. I tremendously enjoyed them. Thank you very much. As for Hong Kong situation, the scenario is indeed complex and multi-layered. Let me try to be brief here. In Hong Kong, the importance of play has been stressed for at least over 3 decades, actually fairly long. And this is viewed widely as something good. Okay. For example, Hong Kong kindergarten teachers generally believe that play is natural instinct and numerous positive emotions are attached with play. They also widely agree that play has a cognitive, language, physical, and social emotional benefits for young learners. So this is very much in line with the international literature. However, I want to say, although there have been many achievements in various aspects and also on different levels, our overall reality is far from satisfactory. In general, theoretical understanding of LTP is still, in my eyes, fairly low. And even worse is how we can implement, how we do in practice. For many of our frontier teachers, even they have a positive view, they often find it difficult to implement. And indeed, research repeatedly shows that Hong Kong young children suffer from emotional and mental problems. Contributing factors, of course, are many, including home. We have very, very, very limited space, okay? Generations stay together within a very small box, many families. And so including family, school, and the wider community. But in my eyes, more fundamentally, this is mainly due to Hong Kong's competitive culture and the corresponding exam-oriented schooling. At present, there is an urgent need for more concerted efforts, mentioned by others also just now, between frontier teachers and education researchers, the government, and the wider community. At the moment, such coordination and integration is still very much lacking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So based on those kind of circumstances, then what is your suggestions to Hong Kong's education area? How can Hong Kong leverage the power of learning through play in education in the near future?
Thank you. This is much more subjective, my own view. Well, first of all, I think we need to create an environment. I think Kathy and Junior both mentioned this earlier. If the environment allows our children, our young learners, to fully develop their strengths, each individually and differently. This sounds a cliche. It is very important. It is not the fact in Hong Kong. Let me emphasize this. So we must give priority to our young children's interest and their joy. Secondly, children are born to learn through play, and learning is broad, interconnected, and dynamic. They should be encouraged. I mean, young children should be encouraged to interact much more among themselves and also with the community. Hong Kong adults need to spend much more time and have many more activities with children. Thirdly, Hong Kong is a highly technologized community. We can make better use, much more use, and more positive use of technology. Combine technology with playful learning approaches in many creative ways. Finally, I want to emphasize this as an education researcher. Another observation. Zhao mentioned earlier the Chinese culture, and Kathy also mentioned in a different way. One major reason for our teachers to feel difficult to implement Iotp is the incompatibility of Western and Chinese ideas of education and children. We are all familiar with Munxi's famous saying, heaven is going to give a great responsibility to someone. It first makes his mind endure suffering. So such a view continues to be influential in our society, and I would personally argue it should be. However, traditional Chinese culture tends to credit nurture over nature in human learning and achievement. Here, I'm not saying which one is more true or better. What I really want to emphasize is that incompatible nature creates difficulties for our educators at almost all levels. This, I think, it is an arduous task to get this mix correct. We are not there yet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So my last question go back to Bo again. This is our last question for this session. So Bo, based on our preliminary results of this project, then what's your advice to parents and practitioners looking to use learning through play technique in China?
Yes, thank you. It was very interesting to listen to the different perspectives. And actually, I realized that some of the things we forget is that as adults, we are educated in a very different reality that we are in right now. Our memory of our own learning is not necessarily the best starting point for how we educate future generations. So when I reflect on what the insights here are being shared is the growing evidence of how children learn through play is when they're actively engaged in hands-on experiences. They don't learn when they're passive. They don't learn if they don't enjoy the experiences and don't enjoy the learning environment. So we have environments around us, not only in the school, but in the communities outside, which we can activate to stimulate multiple senses where children really deeply understand things. And I think we can achieve learning in such environments, but we may not be able to help children learn faster, but we are able to help children remember things for longer, and be able to help children better understanding much more complex concepts. And they're much better able to apply that knowledge to solve real problems. And they're better able to be motivated to keep learning. So there's so many more benefits to think about that natural way of engaging children where they want to keep on learning, not only the short-term benefits. If you look at what I hear also in terms of parents and their role, it's pretty amazing to hear that the play and learning is beginning to converge. There's still quite a distance in our attitudes and understandings. But if we begin to understand that there is a need for parents and children to engage in shared interest, then it's also about figuring out what parents and children enjoy doing together. Because parents who engage in playful experiences with their children, they actually have better relationships with their children. They also, have better well-being. And they also have lower stress and increased flexibility. So there's benefits for parents and children to play and learn together. And then I think it's, I'm very focused, and I think it's a very good challenge to think about how teachers can apply this. Because teachers are doing a remarkable job, and it's becoming much more complex world to be a teacher in. But we need to help teachers with practical examples to demonstrate this. And what I think stand out here in the dialogue is that we need much better collaborations between the school, the parent, and the community, because there are so many opportunities for teachers to take children to the museums, to the outdoor, to solve real practical problems that exist in the community and use them as examples in the classroom. So it's opening the eyes and opportunities to what are the resources in the ecosystem around us. And finally, I would say it is deeply concerning and important to think about the role of technologies and really carefully think about what actually works for children's learning. So we're not implementing technologies that are passive and distracting, but actually find new standards for the ways technologies can be used for learning through play.
Okay, thank you very much, both. Thank you for all the honored guests for your sharing. It's very inspiring. So let's go to the Q&A session now.
Thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you, Dr. Meng, for leading the discussions. We'll move on to our Q&A. At this time, we welcome Professor Yang Rui and Mr. Edward Ma on stage to lead conversations with Professor Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, Dr. Zhenjie Shang, Dr. Bo Stern-Thompson, and Dr. Zhao Meng.
Thank you very much, all the great speakers. We are fortunate to have speakers joining us live. We are in a good time zone, good time difference. So welcome. To Bo, to Kathy, to Professor Shang, and also Professor Yang joining us in person in Hong Kong. So the first question actually coming from the audience is, I guess I'll go in reverse order, if I may go to Professor Yang first. The audience asked this question, so how is the notion of learning through play compatible with exam-focused education systems in Asia? And if I may, after Professor Yang, I'll go to Professor Shang and then to Bo and Kathy. Thank you.
It's really, it's really a difficult question. Maybe you can help me. I really want to apologize. I didn't realize I look that bad when I look at myself. Maybe the real person looks even worse. Anyway, but let me say, this is really a difficult question. As I'm getting older, I'm more interested in this. You know, every day we have so beautiful, many important theories. They're often developed in different parts of the world. And when we often simply take those theories and we try to apply them directly in our schools. It's actually very, very, very difficult. But we don't always realize where the difficulty is, how to solve the difficulty. It's actually very, very difficult. Let me explain a little bit. Can I just start more broadly and ask you to reflect a few things? One is, do you think when I say we, East Asian or Chinese people more specifically, we have the same concept of happiness, 快乐, or pleasure, 愉快, with Anglo-Saxon people or Western people? And that's the first question. The second question is, do you think, as ordinary Chinese or Westerner, which one do you think is happier in general? Okay. The third is, well, particularly for the philosophers, philosophers and great thinkers. I'm going to say the third one is, the third one is when, between the East Asian and Western, let's say Anglo-Saxon societies, those people, and when they lose their loved ones, which people can get rid of the pain, can recover more swiftly? And the first question, I cited these three because at least two of them have really well based on research. The first one, how Chinese people define happiness or pleasure. It's actually a wonderful study by a California university. She wrote a book called the China Pleasure Book. It's a wonderful book. And she has said something which we Chinese people do not realize. And she said, how Chinese people define pleasure. You know, we talk about learn through play. You know, we want that fun, you know. But how we define pleasure? And what's the opposite to pleasure in the Chinese society? And she finds the opposite is instability, uncertainty, rather than pain. Okay, rather than pain. So that's one. It's a famous book. And we Hong Kong U Library has this book. The second one is my own personal observation. For a long, long time, when I was a sophomore student, I raised the question, which one is happier? If you go to Peking University Philosophy Department, 80 years old, they say you are a young man or young woman. They live very, very long. Professors in Chinese, in Peking University Philosophy Department. They are good thinkers, and they live very long, and they are happy. Nearly overwhelmingly, all of them are happy. If you look at many famous great minds in the West, they are almost mad. They are almost mad often. They're very painful. I'm not saying which one is better, okay? I'm saying this kind of thing. And look, I can give you many examples if I had more time, but it's really not accidental. It's really not accidental. And I think many, many more we need to explore there. Another one is which one can recover from the loss. It's actually East Asian people. It's actually East Asian people because we are relational more, and we can change. People can help us. We can get support from people close to us. So I want to emphasize we do have different understanding. You know, maybe we do not understand so deeply these kind of issues, but all these traditions influence the way we think, the way we live our life deeply. So because of this difference, we just cannot simply take the great theories to our society and our classroom and just take it for granted that will work. Okay, pedagogy and learning are hugely, hugely contextualized. Therefore, so we have in Hong Kong, I cannot provide answers. We have many, many issues. Okay, so to learn through play is really difficult in Hong Kong to implement. I support the idea, but we need much, much more work, theoretical work, I mean, to find where the difficulty is. Maybe Yidan Foundation can help us more.
Thank you, Professor Yang.
Yeah, thank you.
Professor Xiang, would you like to build on that?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. For this question, I think this is a very challenging question, and it's very difficult. I think I can only give you 4 suggestions. First, we need to know that the online learning and life is the trend in the future. What we can do is to accept it and follow the trend instead of rejecting and resisting it. Otherwise, our children will be out of the times. Second, as the parents and teachers, we also need to learn and research the online learning and life. For example, we need to know the positive and negative values of the games. Which kinds of games are useful for children's learning, and how children should play games to learn more and learn effectively. Third, we need to guide our children how to learn and live online. To be specific, we can help them develop the abilities of information literacy, time managing, and self-regulated strategies. Finally, it's better to learn and play together with our children. For example, try to play a game with children, and you will obtain many opportunities to communicate with children and provide more support for them in this process. In this way, children would learn more effectively and more happily. In Chinese, 让孩子们学习得更科学、更快乐、更有效。Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Shang. And Bo and Kathy, do you have anything to add on your observations on collaborating with researchers and practitioners in Asia, I suppose?
Bo, do you want me to go first, or you? Yes, I think you raise a very, very interesting and important question about the way researchers communicate with practitioners and teachers and educators, and by the way, city policy and government policy. And I think that learning through play is so powerful as a deep learning system. And by that, I mean a learning system where we hold on to the information and can then transfer the information to a new context and situation. That's at least the way we define learning in the academic context, in the science. So I think what we're really confronted with here is the question of what counts as success. And as scientists, it is our obligation to provide the world not with specific things you must do now, but with a responsive, culturally responsive, scientifically adaptable set of principles which will allow us to work with teachers and suggest that a change in mindset of how we teach can happen without changing what we teach. Now, we've actually tried this in the United States, in Singapore, and in schools in Japan. And what we find is that you can achieve exactly the same curricular outcomes. Students will do at least as well, if not better, on the outcome tests in a learning through play environment as they do in one that is rote learning, with one big difference, that by having active, engaged, hybrid learning, what you see is that the kids hold on to the information and they can transfer that information and use it in a new context. So where do we go from here? I think it's a matter of helping to show people these results. So it's a matter of changing attitudes toward play. And that's what we are studying right now with the Yidan Foundation and the Lego Foundation. And what we do find is, you are right, that right now the attitudes are farther apart in China than they are in other parts of the world. That is, in China, we think of play and learning as very different. We have to start to see the way in which these interact. I think the next thing we have to do is we have to have policies that allow us to see that education is no longer trapped in a classroom, that it goes beyond the walls of a classroom into the community and hence into our policy. So China's Child-Friendly Cities initiative, I think, is going to be a very exciting way to blend the school and out-of-school experiences and to use the science of learning through play to achieve that.
Thank you. And Bo?
I just add, it is a very important question, and particularly right now where we see a need to scale these approaches. But I think what stands for me is that we have to look at what unites us as humans across different cultures. There's something we have in commonality, that our emotional well-being and our joy of learning new things, even when they're difficult, and how we're most beneficial to society is actually intersecting between playing and learning, which is a natural part of how we learn, but that it looks very different in different cultures. There's not only one way to do that. So I think that's the most important, that I see, that there's a science, there's a natural human development process where you actually play and learn through exploration and you're being creative, but there's not one way to do that. The different communities can do that in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we are receiving a lot of questions. I wish we have more time, but I'll have to go to all other speakers on maybe a short answer. What would you attribute to being maybe the major barrier to implementing learning through play in your experience? Who would like to go first? Just a quick.
I'll go by saying that I think what we have found in our research is that people really don't understand that when a child is playing a game and is counting out the spaces of how far to go, they're really doing mathematics. And they don't understand often that there's a link, a quintessential link between play and learning. I think if we can help people see that link, it will open our eyes to the possibilities of a much richer world with a suite of outcomes that will prepare children for the 21st century.
Thank you. Any other thought?
I certainly, I entirely agree with what has been said by Karen. I think the link is much more difficult theoretically and practically than we usually think. But we have to do a lot of good work on that, you know, and that's, in my eyes, fairly urgent. Yeah.
Professor Zhang?
Okay. My major is the learning science and game-based learning. I think we should pay more attention to the digital games and research how to use the games in our education, because the children very, very like the games. Thanks.
Thank you. And Bo, finally?
Yeah, I think it's really about a collaboration between stakeholders, I see. It's very important, as was mentioned in the research, we communicated clearly the value and outcomes towards parents and demonstrate at the same time as governments recognize that there's a broader outcomes, emotional well-being, social emotional, creativity and learning is not against each other. Actually, it strengthens each other, these types of skills. These are the two most important things. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all wonderful panelists for today. And thank you, audience, for all your questions.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor, and to Edward, thank you very much.